Anyways, that's my own life.
Yeah,
But podcast is cheaper than therapy.
and I'm sure you as you tell us, as you keep saying, I'm sure that the listeners have missed you talking about your life, though.
Sure.
They've been wondering how the kids are doing. Welcome back to Cult Favorite, everybody. We have missed you so. This is the podcast that will not overcharge for printing supplies, among other things. I'm Merinda Simmons.
And I'm Mike Altman. We are two religious studies professors trying to understand all of these cult documentaries that you can't stop binge watching.
I'm interested in how grifters identify the thing that, like, with which they are going to grift. Like toner, you know?
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Toner? Yeah. I mean, I think it's things that no one knows what it's actually worth. Like,
People,
you could be like, this toner is $50 or it's $500. I'd be like, it's like car parts.
We're going to talk about a group that, among other of its ills, overcharged for printing supplies that then they never provided. It was one of their.
Yeah. They did a lot of stuff.
Yeah, they did a lot of stuff.
I was going to say the podcast that didn't smuggle drugs.
Well, I mean, we're skipping ahead to our content warning, but
yes.
Go ahead and tell them how to support the show.
Yeah,
Mike.
if you want to support the show, you can find us on all of the socials at Cult Favorite Pod. Also, be sure to subscribe to the show and leave us a rating and a review on Spotify or on Apple. Those help other people find the shows, the more ratings and reviews. And maybe I'll read it if you leave one.
So we're talking about Kundalini yoga and the documentary Breath of Fire. Content warning is that sexual assault comes up inside of the goings on in this group. So if you want to sit this one out and come back in a couple of weeks, no big deal.
Yeah.
We get it.
Yeah.
What'd you know before, Mike?
What did I know? I knew
this is an HBO documentary.
Yes, this is on Max. Breath of Fire on Max. It and it debuted at the end of last year. Like started, I think it ran like November into December.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that Yogi T was sketchy. Vaguely knew that someone had told me that, and connected to some sort of guru movement. I knew about 3HO through some of the reading in American and Asian in sort of as a sort of South Asian inspired movement from the 60s and 70s, but it wasn't one that I had like done a lot of reading about.
Mm-hmm.
And I also knew that Philip DeSlip was who I've known for a long time now in the world of people who study Hindu stuff in America, was in the documentary. So
he's the resident scholar in the documentary. He has excellent posture.
He does.
Very good posture.
I want to know if that's his record collection behind him. I have so many questions to Phil about this.
I knew that Yogi Tea is a thing. I've seen it in stores, but I definitely did not know that it was attached to a yoga guru movement. Yeah. And I had heard the phrase Kundalini yoga, but that's about where it starts and stops for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Give it to us.
So, all right, here we go. 5-minute quick synopsis if you haven't
watched it. One of our
New
Year's resolutions is to keep our 5-minute synopses to 5 minutes. We'll see how we do.
I don't make resolution. I set goals. All right.
Sure. These are the kinds of rhetorical gymnastics that we talk about with critical thinking skills on this very podcast. So go ahead.
Okay. So we have four episodes, and they sort of weave together. They sort of braid the story of Guru Jagat, who is sort of the 2010s into 2020s figure in the documentary, and Yogi Bhajan, who is the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and died in I think 2004.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that's the big picture. It sort of takes these two figures and weaves their stories together. It's based on a Vanity Fair article. So think about Hillsong, and which was the Hillsong doc we started off with. That was also based on a Vanity Fair article.
His organization was called 3HO, which is like
Happy, Healthy, Holy.
There it is. And then 40 years later, Guru Jagat's her birth name, Katie Griggs. I don't know how you want to describe her in this
I don't
discussion, but her organization is called Rama. So they each have
the Rama Institute of Wellness or something. All right, so 4 episodes. Here we go. Episode 1 is introducing the 2 gurus and their seekers. So we get a lot of interview after interview after interview of people who were either part of Rama or part of 3HO. We get this very interesting little explainer on like Kundalini yoga, which is this sort of intense physical and breathing practice that also involves sort of deep reflection on personal experiences, sometimes traumatic experiences. And it does have this sort of euphoric experience that it generates.
because you're depriving oxygen to your brain. Is that why?
Maybe.
Because like I didn't understand how it's very different from. This is why these.
I
aren't
mean,
5
it could be the
minutes,
same
but-
euphoric experience you get from, a mega church. I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. Like I was not super clear on the explanation. But
And so this episode does this thing where it's blending the story of like 2010 millennials seeking wellness culture and 1960s and 70s countercultural seekers,
Mhm.
and how they each find these 2 gurus whose connection will be sort of more elucidated throughout the rest of the episodes. Well, one of the other big things that I think runs throughout it that comes up in the first episode is Yogi Bhajan, who looks like a Sikh dude from South Asia. The ways that Sikhism as a quote unquote world religion, and there is a sort of representative Sikh who comes on and talks about the values of Sikhism and how that gave some like authenticity and legitimacy to Yogi Bhajan and 3HO.
Well, to a bunch of white hippies,
Right.
who were
Yes.
looking for.
But that like 3HO and Kundalini was somehow connected to Sikhism and therefore okay.
Yeah.
And it's a religion and not, etc.
They didn't need a lot of nuance to identify
No.
and romanticize a kind of racial and religious otherness.
Right. And then it sort of ends. This is a great. I think it's a very well made documentary, and every episode ends with this sort of like looming, to keep you streaming the next episode.
Mm.
That maybe Kundalini yoga is just something made up, and that Guru Jagat may be a phony. And so then we pick up episode 2, which is about building these 2 brands and these 2 movements, and it moves back and forth between how Yogi Bhajan sort of invented Kundalini yoga on his own. He claims it's, has thousands of years of history and etc. But like all modern yoga is a fabrication and has its own colonial history most of the time.
Mm.
We get the history of the 3HO movement as it grows out of the 60s and 70s. We hear about how much sort of high control there was within 3HO. Yogi Bhajan famously sort of had a way of doing everything, that you should do everything in certain ways. And so there was very prescriptive life for members of the group. He started these boarding schools for once the members started having kids in India, and there was all sorts of abuse in these boarding schools overseas where members were sending their children.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get the backstory of Guru Jagat, Katie Griggs. She starts off getting involved in this sort of wellness, new agey space called Golden Bridge, and then starts doing astrology videos on YouTube, and then sort of coins the name Kundalini Katie. And then she gets interested in Kundalini yoga and is connected to Hari Jiwan, who is sort of the third figure that goes in the whole documentary, who is a very, very close early disciple of Yogi Bhajan, and had his own intense meditation training and teaching he did around traumatic memories. And he identifies Katie as this like sort of natural performer. She's very charismatic. She's a very, very kind of naturally funny person. And so in like 2004, allegedly, she gets this name Guru Jagat. This is her. At one point, she likens it to like a rap name. I mean, this is her.
She says that.
Yeah, she says that. It's her gimmick, right? Like it's her gimmick. And she
did not like that comparison
to a rap name.
Yes, but go ahead. Anyway,
it's a pro wrestling. We're
keeping this 5 minutes.
It's a pro wrestling name. And then basically, Hari Jiwan wants to open his own yoga studio, but can't for a variety of reasons.
He had just been in jail.
Yeah,
that's the whole thing. He was involved in the toner fraud.
Yes.
Organization. They were making kind of crank calls to people
Yeah.
saying you're out of toner, you need a different toner, or I don't know what, but toner was the thing. And then it's going to cost you gajillion dollars, and you can only buy it from us, and people would do this. And then they wouldn't give them toner. They would just sort of pocket the money. Anyway, Harry G1 went to jail for a couple of years.
So Harry G1
Came out.
identifies Katie, Kundalini Katie, or Guru Jagat as
Kundalini Kate. It doesn't matter. Go ahead.
As a great front person for a Los Angeles yoga studio. And so the Rama Institute opens in Venice Beach, and that leads to a kind of ominous ending to the episode of like, her mom saying like she chose all of it. She joined the darkness. The mom, who's a phenomenal character in the whole documentary as well. Episode 3 is like, let's talk about all the scams and abuse in both these organizations, 3HO and Rama. So we get a bunch of Guru Jagat sort of, I think this was my term. I don't think I said prosperity dharma, but it's sort of a prosperity gospel for new agey folks. And then there's this idea that sort of in the 2010s, especially around 2015, they begin to sort of target a sort of millennial women, sort of an edgier audience, and bring them into Rama with various price points for various classes you can take. And it's very...
And levels of access to Guru Jagat.
Yes. Yeah. There's a tithing thing where everyone has to pay 11%, which is like 1% more than most evangelicals. So that's fun. That's fascinating.
Sure.
And then I don't know. So they're like, we're just like add an extra percent. And then they move, the documentary shifts to sort of this back and forth between the past, the more recent and the more distant past. It shifts to 3HO and Yogi Bhajan, and his sort of, he uses the phrase seva. Was that in Buddhafield too? Did he use that same word?
Oh, I forgot.
But which means often translated as service. I mean, in a number of South Asian traditions, it's basically doing good work. Like it's like volunteering and taking care of people and all this sort of stuff. So it gets turned into like seva for Yogi Bhajan, where he gets all this service from his followers for free. There's the toner scam that we just talked about. There's multiple businesses. They have a security firm they run that is like hired by the federal government.
Yeah, they did stuff with ICE.
Yeah.
Etc.
And then there's a drug smuggling operation that also happens. That might have been what Harry G1 got in jail
Bringing
for.
marijuana from Thailand. Is that what he got?
I think it was the drug smuggling.
Well, Harry G1 was involved with lots of these.
And then
enterprises. On
top of this, in a way that was not dissimilar from a number of groups we've looked at already in documentaries, Yogi Bhajan has a level of secretaries. It will come clear he is sexually abusing. These are women who are in his employ, who are both giving him sort of daily domestic service, but then are also being abused. This is then the shift to, and this is the weird, like the stuff that Guru Jagat does that's bad and icky, and the stuff that Yogi Bhajan does that bad, it do not seem equivalent, but they keep moving back and forth. So then
I think it's like we'll talk about this. Yeah. I think it's like a trajectory, but we'll get there. Yeah.
So Guru Jagat is also incredibly just a terrible boss. Has her own kind of cruelty to the people working for her at Rama, most of whom came in as like disciples and then worked their way up into
lots of yelling and public shaming.
Yeah, there's a number of lawsuits against Yogi Bhajan and the sexual abuse in the 80s, and we actually hear from Mahani Khalsa, who was raped by Yogi Bhajan as a secretary, and she sort of tells her whole story, and this leads to as they're kind of going through the stories that are coming out at the end of this episode, Pamela Dyson, who is a former member, her memoir was published in 2019, and then that leads to a whole sort of cascade of survivors.
It's part of what actually got Mahani Khalsa to tell her story.
Yes. Dyson's sort of was the first story that then Khalsa tells her story in the documentary, like to the directors.
Yeah.
So a piece of this is when Yogi Bhajan dies in 2004, all of the wealth he has amassed is sort of put in trust and is going to be given to the secretaries, but they are not allowed to sort of speak ill of Yogi Bhajan. And that's
what it depends on.
Yeah, that's what it depends on. So you almost have like, this is very similar to lots of sort of NDA situations we see now, where women are paid. The most recent one I'm thinking of is the Janelle Grant case against Vince McMahon, where she's paid like $2 million of course, he stopped paying, and now there's a lawsuit.
Mm.
But by 2019, Dyson is sort of is no longer going to be beholden to this, and she writes her memoir. Sort of this episode 3 ends with Rama sort of severing its ties with 3HO, but Guru Jagat not knowing how to. Like, her authenticity was based upon her claims of closeness to Yogi Bhajan early in her career, and now she has to distance herself from him. How does she do that without losing her claim to having any kind of authority?
And it's tricky because, like, the reason that they sever ties is because 3HO was actually admitting abuse and recognizing the harm done, to whatever extent that it did that. Rama was doing none of that and was still upholding the image of Yogi Bhajan as this infallible being. And so that's why and how they severed ties with 3HO.
And there is a sort of reparations fund set up by 3HO after Dyson's memoir. I think it starts in like 2023, maybe.
Like, the distancing that she does from Yogi Bhajan is because it comes out that she never actually met him.
Right.
like that's the distancing.
Yes,
you know what I mean? So
exactly.
it's not a distancing ideologically or of him as a figure, so much as it is like a matter of logistical falsification.
Yeah. And then we get the last episode, which is about Guru Jagat's death for the most part. And it opens with Becky Lavelle, who started an Instagram account called Wrong at Rama. And we kind of, the whole last episode is a moment by moment tracking of Guru Jagat, Katie Griggs's sort of downfall and just falling apart. She gets married in 2019. She's traveling like crazy when it begins to get interested in certain conspiracy theories. And then by 2020, with the pandemic, is going like full anti-vax conspiracy theorists.
Masks are unconstitutional.
Lizard people.
Yeah.
And I did like the phrase that one of the people in the documentary coined of conspiritualists. So
it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Had you never heard that term before?
I mean, I knew them.
Yeah.
I know of them, but I did not know they were called that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the summer of 2021, her health is deteriorating. She breaks her ankle in Germany. She's traveling like crazy.
She breaks her ankle, but she refuses to get surgery in Germany.
Flies back
to LA, which is a very long flight to take with a broken ankle. You dramatically increase your chances of blood clot.
And then,
which is a real problem.
Yes. She dies August 1st, 2021.
She's 41 years old.
That was shocking for a second. And then there's a whole thing about her funeral and the ways that she becomes almost instantly sort of canonized as this Kundalini saint. On the one hand, Harry Jiwan is talking all this, about her in this way. But her friend Laura, her best friend from childhood, who shows up throughout the documentary and is a very interesting character and kind of foil that the directors use, I think, in a lot of ways. She gives a speech that's very much talking about her as like a person that sort of they make notice of. By October of 2024, Rama is closing its LA location. Hari Jiwan is still going with the other 2 locations they have. And it sort of closes with, I think Philip DeSlip says this, that like Kundalini is this very like American story about how religion works, about sort of the creation and sort of fabrication of this thing that they claim to be ancient, about the way it uses the connection to Sikhism as a way to shield it from federal investigation because it's a religious group. And so that was sort of an interesting way that they sort of wrap up the whole thing.
I thought Stacey Stukin made that point. I don't know.
Okay, sure. Yeah, no, I think you're right.
She was a journalist, but she and Philip DeSlip have collaborated and done work together, and so they actually have a podcast that was kind of like the companion to the documentary.
You listened to like one episode of that, right?
Yeah, I
didn't
listened
listen
to
any
one episode.
of it. Yeah, maybe I will.
This is why it's how I found out why he has such good posture, because he was a Kundalini practitioner and teacher for 10 years.
Okay.
I don't know. That's how I explain his extraordinarily good posture anyway.
So I think that was probably more than 5 minutes.
It was more than, but we're doing,
your iPhone and tell me.
We're moving in the right direction though.
What do you want to talk about, Merinda?
Okay. So when last we met our hero, you had talked about how there is not a like genre as such of cult documentaries listed in that way on these streaming services.
Yeah.
That we have identified that genre. I mean, lots of people have identified the genre, but like it's not something that belongs to media as such. You know, they're identified as true crime or whatever, like the way that they get categorized. And yet, I mean, this is my ongoing refrain. It's gonna keep on trucking in 2025, everybody. That like they keep insisting though on identifying cults as something really specific. So one of the things that I am interested in or want to talk about is that genre disconnect as I see it, because like, okay, so you mentioned Dislip. He's a scholar of religion. He identifies as an academic in religious studies, but is also coming out of this tradition as a practitioner himself. And he characterizes really casually cults as a thing with a you know what you love it. It's a charismatic leader. It's got a specific superstructure. There's an all-encompassing lifestyle. There are intense demands of the leaders. But
it's
and so I'm interested in how there are like we have not taken the step of identifying cult documentaries as a specific media genre.
Right.
But we are deeply invested in identifying cults as something super specific that takes our regular true crime genre into a space that, like, when you add religion and stir, you have something that is supposed to make strange and weird and kooky this thing that actually, again, I think is very mundane.
Yeah, they'll put cult in the name of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and the streamers will
it's part of how you draw people to watch the thing. Like, it is part of the appeal.
But they won't.
Is the term cult?
They won't call it. But like Max and Netflix don't want to actually label it, right? So they'll let the content producers use this term. But
so,
they don't want to go that far.
And I'm not suggesting that there should be necessarily
it would
a
make
genre.
my life a lot easier to find these.
Because I mean, I think that would be its own brand of problematic. I think that would be reproducing the very issue that I'm addressing as something that is not cool. Like, you know how I feel about the term cult. But and I guess I think that there is so much work that is done by that term that then that we rely on to say all sorts of things that otherwise might go unsaid. Yeah. And that we are able to not say because it does that work for us. And is what I mean.
It's interesting how quickly the word cult comes up in this documentary. I mean, it's there it's there in the first episode from I think even from Philip and other journalists. I think the first episode ends with Katie Griggs's mom saying it's hard for me to believe that she'd become a cult leader.
What else do you call her? Yeah.
Right. A successful businesswoman.
Right. I mean, it has to come up quickly because all of these have a really specific arc. And we've talked about this before. It's initially here's why it's super appealing to people. Here's how it's drawing folks in. Quick flash to here are all of the ills and evils that lurk beneath the surface. And then it kind of unspools into a narrative trajectory. I don't know, man.
Yeah, there is something to the gradual reveal of these. Because if I was going to sit down and write an article, write this as an article or something, I would start with Yogi Bhajan, and we wouldn't I might start with some cool opening image, but I would probably just proceed chronologically in a way. But it's this is constantly it's generally chronological. It starts with her and ends with her death, but then within that it's this constant back and forth, and then stuff that doesn't get fully revealed to the end that you're well, I could have known that. It would have been nice to know this from the beginning.
I'm not mad at non-linearity. What happens explicitly is that kind of typical story that we identify and have discussed about, like, anybody can join a cult. So let's begin with, you know, what the appeal is, and hearing people talk about why it seems to be something that draws them in, because it's kind of taking you on that sort of journey. But implicitly, the way that I think that these function is, I'm taking you on a journey to the zoo. Right. And I'm going to show you these like weird animal habits. Isn't that funny what those monkeys are doing? And the whole time it reminds you that you're a human, that your species somehow is like on the other side of these glass enclosures, and that you pay money to see these things. And it's about actually their otherness and your humanity, rather than like getting you to relate at all with any kind of empathy or demystify your own romanticizing of human in the process. So it's like anybody can join a cult. We're all implicated. Any one of us could do this thing. And now let me tell you a story about how that will make you feel impossibly removed from this group of others.
Okay.
In my opinion.
I want to pitch a different option.
Go. I would love it.
So especially it struck me with this one, with the first episode, it gives you a variety of different characters, whether it's a boomer aged 3HO member or a millennial aged Rama member. And it gives you a bunch of them in a row, and then it gives you the mom and the stepdad. And so my theory is that it's actually trying to give you one character that you'll actually relate to. So it's less about otherness, and that then you'll see yourself in that person, and it's this cast of characters we're going to follow the whole way.
Let me be clear. I think that the people are deeply compelling.
Right.
And I think that there are lots of moments of connection as a viewer with like employees that get exploited or whatever. I think that generically the form of these documentaries as being a story to tell is something like it's the trip to the zoo in the first place. I guess is the thing that I think it's why are we interested in stories about serial killers? How is it that we are really compelled by these people as individuals? I think it's because that we want to identify them as something very external to the worlds that we know.
I think that's true about the Guru Jagats and Yogi Bhajans of the world. Like Yogi Bhajan does not come across as like a human being.
Yeah.
Right. I think for a variety of reasons, Guru Jagat, Katie Griggs does in a little bit in different ways, but I think Hari Jawan does not. Hari Jawan just seems like this sort of evil Disney character in a way. But I think like there's the difference between the serial killer documentaries and the cult documentaries is that we have interviews with the survivors of the cult stuff.
Sure.
In a way that that the audience, I think, is meant to we're meant to identify with them and not with the evil people in a way that the serial killer documentary doesn't have that in the same sense, right? I have a theory that I have not figured out a way to prove that these documentaries are most popular with people, are more popular with people who have some sort of religious background in their biography than it is like people who have no religious context.
I think that that's maybe that would be interesting to learn. I think that, okay, it's like this. It's like we tell in an explicit way the story of, Ted Bundy just looks like the guy next door. Right. Anybody could have fallen for his wiles. He's a charming dude. He's very handsome, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that's the surface story. the reason that we are telling a story about Ted Bundy at all, though, as such, is to remind like our nervous system, our lizard brain, that I'm not capable of murder.
Right.
And it's like, no, yeah, you are.
Yeah,
you are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's a kind of what this person is capable of. The evil that somehow, exists inside of this charming veneer is something that separates humans from monsters. And I'm just saying, no. Because we are all capable of intense monstrosity, if you want to identify it as such.
I'm capable of spending thousands of dollars at Rama.
Yeah.
But I'm not capable of being Guru Jagat.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I do think
we are victims. We are exploitable, but we are never complicit in or actively engaged in our own harm. That like, no, we are committing harms and atrocities in all sorts of ways. But that's more again these like embedded in structures of capitalism, et cetera, et cetera.
This is why you like the Brandy Hellville so much,
because
it immediately
100%.
shifts it from the evil dudes running this company to like the all of us.
I mean, that guy was like, he's
all of us.
He's a dick, but like in the process of buying fast fashion, we are actively contributing to the shores, just littered with garbage, clothes, like textile waste.
Does the way this? I think this is a particularly good documentary in the genre. Does the way that it treats Guru Jagat different for you than a lot of the others? In terms of like the evil monster, the othering.
I mean, I don't know, man. The other thing that I had on, like, so maybe this is a segue. What I wanted to talk about was this phenomenon of conspirituality, which is, an amalgam of conspiracy theory and spirituality. So it's if someone is a conspiracy theorist in the name of a brand of spiritualism, and or vice versa, like that is how that's the context into which Katie Griggs appears. And I think that so I don't know if I have to think about your question more and how I feel about it, but I don't think it's all that different. I think that like what you were saying about, Yogi Bhajan's brand of exploitation and all of the atrocities that he committed, and Guru Jagat 40 years later. I think that that trajectory is a kind of I think what it shows is Guru Jagat as a logical conclusion or extension of what Yogi Bhajan was up to, rather than some kind of ironic or like confusing juxtaposition. I see her as this like a natural outgrowth of a context that already existed, which makes loads of sense then why even in her, like, they talk a lot about the sort of boss babe ethos of the millennial brand, like literal brand of Kundalini yoga, like that I think is of course where a late 60s capitalistic material prosperity gospel of, sick inflected, but departure as well. Like that kind of yogi is headed. I think that's and so in that sense, I thought it was a good documentary. I don't like, this is maybe just an aesthetic concern that I think does a lot of that othering work. All of those like images and of staged like people in white robes like dancing around and flowing and stuff
that were not like footage they caught off the internet, but like they had a dancer.
Yeah.
And that's how it ends.
I don't love that.
Ended with that.
I don't like that. It's like I don't know what, I mean, I do know what they're doing, but it's just what it does is it gives you a lush foliage to look at, if I can extend my zoo metaphor.
Yeah.
As a kind of backdrop for whatever it is that you're looking at. I don't know. But anyway, this phenomenon of conspirituality and like its overdetermined feminization. They talk about how like the relationship between conspiritualists, if we grant that term, with right-wing conspiracy theorists like Alex Jones or whatever. And so I have thoughts, but one of the things I wanted to pitch to you was like the overdetermined feminization of this kind of hippie conspirituality movement, how yoga gets branded and marketed to especially white women of means on one hand, and then the like hyper masculine dude energy of right-wing conspiracy theory. I don't know, thoughts?
So my first thought is there's a historical irony in that early forms of modern yoga that appear like in the that culminate in like the 1920s and 30s and then come over to the United States in the 60s, like postural yoga, like hatha yoga. What you would do at a YMCA or a Methodist basement today, like has its roots in Indian nationalists who thought that who were being told that India was too feminine and reached back and took European physical culture, like turn of the century bodybuilding and turn of the century like Swedish gymnastics, grabbed terms and ideas from ancient Indian texts, put them together and produced this kind of colonial yoga that then became and there's a lot of great work on this from Mark Singleton and I'm going to forget the name, so I shouldn't start to try to do this. But there's a bunch of good work on this. Anya Foxton has some work on this as well in terms of feminization of breath and how that becomes a part of this. And so like there's this weird historical irony that it's now become like this thing that was meant to show that India was actually, no, we have our own physical culture. We have our own manly way of doing these things. Becomes international, globalized by men like Iyengar, and then becomes a feminine commodity in the West.
Well, and how like just gender is so directly and overtly and demonstrably performed in wellness culture and the but and also too in the kind of the right-wing radio hosts who are,
that's the
giant muscle bros.
Well, and it's because there's a space in between.
And they're all selling supplements or whatever.
Right. But there's like also the space in between of like the way I'm going to cure COVID or my child's ear infection is like essential oils and Jesus, right? So I know that there's that wing of that are very much the kind of Lulu Row women in a certain way, right?
Sure.
That are also tied up in this. And so, I think the way that the way that gender functions, although there are men in this, there are men
Oh, sure,
involved
sure.
in like in these groups.
If you look at conspirituality, is that
Yeah.
I don't know what the Wikipedia entry is for that phenomenon, but all of the people it lists as examples, except for like one, are men.
Yeah.
And I mean, it like the way that the documentary linked the two was this kind of far right and hippie women sharing a fear of like authority in the mainstream. And I guess what's one of the things that I think is really telling about the outcomes of that distrust that I think probably comes from a reasonable or understandable place. There are lots of reasons to distrust our power structures, right? And the people is that the distrust of authority in the way that it is performed and marketed inside of these spaces makes space for strongmen figures, you know? Yeah. And so it's then no accident that these spaces are also deep, like MAGA country, you know?
Well, and that
like they're all that kind of jingoistic, like even if hippies aren't not hippies, but you know, the kind of like women centered millennial, like the white women of means are getting swept into this wellness culture as such, is like, even if they're not nationally jingoistic or kind of like identifying patriotism in a certain way, there's still this space for a kind of authority that exists in a sort of vacuum that then actually creates an even deeper version of the very thing that they distrust.
Do you know what Natural News is?
No.
Okay. So Natural News is the place I always think. It's a website. It's a fake news. It's like a fake news far right website for these sorts of conspiritualist people. So I actually came across it because Phil was posting links from it.
The slip.
Yeah.
Phil, okay.
During COVID, like, this is a nonsense. Like, this is a problem. This is what's happening.
Okay.
And sort of saying, like, I think he was sort of because he's much closer to these communities, identifying this really early on in 2020. And so that's how I knew it existed. But it's a fascinating like place about like anti-vax, but also, all sorts of organic stuff. Like, it's this weird
Venn
place.
diagram. Yeah.
And I think too, like, part of what you're saying about authority is when the trust in the institutions that delegate authority is sort of shot, then it leaves space for like, well, how do you like, authority is based really on like charisma and rhetoric and the ability to manipulate meaningful symbols and terms. And like, so like, I don't think that the people at Rama are like super worried about are super into like the immigration debate, right? But they're super into like the raw milk debate, right? And so one's ability to like find the thing
it's us them
resonates.
Stuff,
yeah, but it's not about actual policy or actual like whoever's in charge of this thing gets to have this authority. It's like, who is manipulating the things that sound authentic to me. It is authority via authenticity alone.
Yeah. And maybe what it's making space for is a kind of, because power dynamics don't disappear just because the traditional authority as mainstream identifies it is removed.
Yeah.
Or distrusted or whatever. What it makes space for is a kind of us, them, like us against the world, evil versus virtue, a kind like it stacks up a power binary based on authenticity.
Right. And democracy is no longer a method for distributing authority. It is a method for identifying authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so
That makes sense.
right. I mean,
Mhm.
and it started like long. I mean, this is the root of the the president I'd want to have a beer with. Like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
like
yeah, sure.
we can easily mock that and talk about how dumb George W. Bush was or whatever.
Mm.
But at bottom, behind that is a claim about like the authority is not about expertise or not even about a democratic process that bestows it. It's like,
Mhm.
no, this person has it, and democracy is supposed to kind of like seal that and codify that.
Mhm.
And if it doesn't, then it's not working and it's rigged, right? Like this is
Yeah.
because it's actually about not just the authenticity of a given leader, but like, do I feel authentic
Mhm.
in the democratic process?
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Um,
Yeah, and I mean, like, there is that. I think there's a podcast called Conspirituality, right? I think so.
yes,
And
maybe.
I think
Don't go
it's
listening to other podcasts.
come on. I think it's it's about like wellness grifters
Mhm.
and exposing them and stuff, which, fine. I think that like while social ills absolutely need to be identified and disrupted, I just think that the only way for a kind of thoroughgoing disruption is when we look more broadly at our own complicity in those
Mhm.
very structures
Yeah.
rather than identifying a bad apple.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a interesting, I don't remember if I watched all the episodes. There's an interesting Netflix series from a few years ago called Unwell
Mm-hmm.
that each episode looks at a different aspect of it was from 2020, the wellness industry.
Right.
I think I've only watched the essential oils one, but there's like
Mhm.
fasting and ayahuasca and bee stings and all sorts of stuff. But anyways,
One of the reasons that so then I guess I'll give my shout out to I think I've mentioned it to you before, but like one of the reasons that I like the podcast Maintenance Phase that also talks about like wellness grifters and is that they talk about wellness culture as an industry that is absolutely profiting on near ubiquitous anti-fat bias
right.
that
Yes.
all of us
Yeah.
contribute to.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, what do you want to talk about, Mike?
Yeah. Well, I want to. It's come up already, but I was really interested in the way that Sikhism functions in the documentary, because on the one level, it allowed Yogi Bhajan to point to a quote unquote real religion. So 3HO can't be a cult because I'm a Sikh, and Kundalini is Sikhism. But it also like all of his white followers in the 60s and 70s and onward are all wearing turbans, not appropriately. They're not carrying kirtans, but there's this weird, not weird, but there's this like they're doing it in some way. And then when it's funny how that worked in the 60s, 70s, 80s, but then when Guru Jagat is doing it in 2014, there's this like, why is this white lady in a turban, right?
Sure.
And they're like the appropriation language, and there's also the phrase misappropriation, which I found fascinating coming out of the mouth of a scholar of religion.
Sure.
That like but the way that Sikhism was just like clearly good religion. Like here is a very articulate Sikh woman who doesn't look like what you'd expect a Sikh woman to look like, who's going to articulate the important principles of Sikhism. And then
you're talking about Sandeep Morrison.
Yes. Okay. And I don't think she's wrong or anything she said was inaccurate or untrue from her perspective. But then the way the documentary presents that as like, that's the thing, and here's our spokesperson for it. And then this other thing was able to use that and misappropriate it and like, not to say that the stuff, obviously that Yogi Bhajan did horribly evil things, but like the way that the Sikh story just stood there, and the role of Sikhism in American society, especially after 9/11, where it's always held up as this it's the thing that's misunderstood. They always think they're Muslims. They always think that in the 1910s and 20s that all these Sikh immigrants come to the United States, to the West Coast, and they're called Hindus. So like but even like, so there's
you've got the good religion, bad religion.
You've got the good religion,
dynamic.
bad religion, and you've got this unique role that Sikhism often plays as the always misunderstood, always misappropriated religion.
I don't know that it has a chapter on that tradition specifically, but we should link the book Hijacked, a critical treatment of the public rhetoric of good and bad religion, edited by our friends Leslie Duro Smith and Stefan Ferding and Adrian Herman. They talk about that very like discourse on like how good and bad religion functions for making all sorts of judgments, and then like policies based on said judgments about different kinds of traditions and the people belonging to them in the world.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting that like there's the Sikhism thing, and then somehow Yogi Bhajan just invented this thing and called it Sikhism. And I'm like, well, like Joseph Smith came up with a whole new thing and was like, it's Christianity, but different. And, any number of people, like Pentecostalism was some Christians inventing a new thing that they said was an old thing, right? Like,
religion is always improvised.
It's always improvised, and then it's
and
always,
and a series of interpretations.
Yes, and it's always reaching back to. It is very often reaching back to authorize itself based on something else that's already accepted. So, like, this is a 1,000-year-old thing connected to Sikhism, or this is another revelation from another revelation from God that tells a different story connected to the Bible, or this is another movement of the Holy Spirit that's right. And and so it's both. Everything is often very much like new and old at the same time.
And so when are those incarnations then, or these new visions for an old tradition, something that seems like an abomination or something that seems like prophetic?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's always going to be both at once, right? Like, I mean, there are plenty of people who do accept and carry forward these improvised new visions, which is why there's a tradition even to talk about. But yeah, like how that rhetoric starts to show up and function then in the conversations that we have about these traditions,
right,
is really interesting. And I think that the I appreciate Sandeep Morrison's presence in the documentary for sure. I was bummed that there was like one token representative of like Sikh authenticity, but whatever. I think that but in a similar sense, you've got the one token scholar of religion that also shows up, and I think that the role of those two specifically was interesting because it shows, because they both use words like I think that at one point she talked about like how Kundalini yoga bastardizes Sikh traditions. Dislip, I can't remember the word that he used, but it was a similar kind of like here's the authentic tradition, here's how people co-opted or changed it for their own like nefarious gains. And I guess it shows how easy it is for scholarship to reproduce insider positions that are potentially more instructive and useful in activism, as Morrison identifies as a Sikh activist. I think that those positions are more instructive and helpful in activist pursuits than they are in analytical ones. But it's easy for scholars to slip into that modality. Yeah. Anyway,
one day I'll give you my theory on it's too much for right now.
Ooh, okay. What you got for a takeaway?
So I kept like, maybe because I had a similar relationship to Katie Griggs that I had to Carl Lentz as I watched this documentary.
Okay.
Where I found her very compelling. I'm like, this is someone that like if I didn't know all of this icky stuff they were doing. But like early, I'm like, this is someone like I know.
She makes sense as an influencer, right?
This is just this is someone who's very charismatic. This is someone that I would be friends with. This is someone
because she's snarky and hip, and she's got a cool voice.
Yes.
And yeah.
And in the same way that I felt that about Carl Lentz in various ways. So I don't know if you know this, Merinda, but I'm a millennial.
Are you really? No kidding.
Which means we love to engage in generational discourse for some reason.
Sure.
There's something. Okay, so my takeaway from this is there's something about this 2010s Instagram era where that connects Rama and Hillsong. Like these are happening at the same time. I didn't go through and like chart out what's happening, but roughly the same time. And through the same forms of social media, and to I would say variations of the same people.
Sure.
Right. And then I would say this is where I wish these things were on. I really wish these things were on TV. Of course, no one watched them.
I mean, if anything, I think that probably Hillsong's audience was a more diverse one. But
probably.
Anyway.
Yeah. No, that's probably true.
But yes, to say a very much both like religious phenomena existing in a digital age.
Right.
For sure.
And I think
social
too
media.
the same sort of age range people would like, and then I think too like there's something about this time period. And I wish we had demographic data. We don't have Nielsen ratings for these things, which frustrates me. And if they were on cable, no one would watch them, so it doesn't matter. But like my guess is that that's also the same demographic who's now watching these things 10 years later. And like maybe it's just the current moment we're in 2025. But like I even find in myself a nostalgia for 2015. Like my partner and I were talking yesterday about like, well, Facebook really sucks now, and Twitter is just completely falling apart. And she was like, I'm on Blue Sky now, but I don't know why. And like Instagram is just so full of ads since, and we were like reminiscing, like, remember when Instagram was cool? Remember when like it was like just easy and like it was really interesting pictures. And it was, and like Twitter was fun and innovative. And I feel like we're in this sort of like social media hellscape, and there's something about these stories of the 2010s that I find, yes, they're like, this is not, these are terrible stories. These are stories of bad things happening, but it's still from a time when things were just so much simpler.
Did you see that like people are automatically following?
Oh, yeah, this is what's like
Donald Trump.
And it's just like, I think there's, even before all that, even before this week of it all, we're recording this on the
22nd of January.
So we're still, it's the whole thing.
Fresh.
But all that is to say, like, I just think there's something, about this time period that is worth attention of those of us interested in religion, and especially in the United States.
Sure.
And that I think these two things are signaling to me that requires more attention.
Yeah.
And then there's also something about their appeal, because I think this was a fairly successful documentary in terms of audience. And so what is it about these documentaries about that time that, like, this goes back to my theory that the majority of the audience for these things has gone through some sort of religious experience in the past, and is sort of like, and so 10 years after that, we're making sense of it. And that's why these things fit in and are compelling. So that was sort of my takeaway, was just this, there's something, it was sort of a signal of like more digging, it was the metal detector on the beach going off, and be like more digging around this, because there's something here about both this time period in its moment and the way we think about it now.
Sure. I mean, I guess sort of in that same vein, I would say that, we are people who are now in our 40s, who are like the consumer demographic, who are trying to like afford places to live, and also hold down a job, but also take supplements and have therapists, but also like we're trying to do it all, and so we want to buy our fast fashion and also get our organic milk. Like it's all of it. I think that we're like any demographic, a rich tapestry. And so I guess in that same vein, I think that we want to reassure ourselves about our own complicities and conspiracies. Like, we all have them.
Yeah.
And so identifying the ones that we think go off the rails helps us feel good about being the ones who are on track, you know?
Yeah.
That's
or having had, if you've had experiences with other ones that went off the rails, you're like, well, this wasn't just mine. It wasn't just me. Right? Like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, can I tell you about my cult favorite? Because here's someone who went, who showed us it was okay to ride our own rails, as it were. Peaches, the pro-sex queer electro clash pioneer.
Yeah.
You know her, you love her. I mean, I hope. If you don't, then like go look her up because she's amazing. There's a 2024 documentary, Teaches of Peaches, that follows her 2022 tour. It was the 20th anniversary of the Teaches of Peaches album. If it doesn't register automatically, you probably have heard her Fuck the Pain Away song. It's kind of her signature song. Anyway, it's a good documentary. It's high time that Peaches received documentary treatment. Marie Lossier made Peaches Goes Bananas this year as well. Lossier is like a curator. She also is a filmmaker, and so that one's got like, I can't wait. I haven't watched it yet. I can't wait to. It'll be more of like an artistic vision though, rather than like nonfiction biography. Regardless, Peaches is having a like at least moment inside of a microspace where those of us who pay attention are living, and so it's really nice to see.
I'm really glad that we're starting 2025 off with two cult favorites that are, I think, just a good distillation of what this is all about. So I am choosing escapism right now. And looking for things that are sort of, I'm looking for meticulously built worlds to step into, to leave this one behind briefly.
Sure.
So what?
Well, I was gonna say, like, I don't know that it's healthy, but it's certainly valid. And those of us who are a little older, I guess my version of that is the holodeck.
Yeah, no, I would love to have one of those right about now. I could do a Sherlock Holmes mystery.
I love them. They were always my favorite episodes. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, the Sherlock Holmes ones. Anyways, a quick, so an update. I think it was like episode 2 or 3, where I talked about Dead Space. Last weekend, I finally beat Dead Space.
Is that the game where Mike Altman is
leader
or something?
It did not reveal much about Michael Altman, and so I'm gonna have to play Dead Space 2 now.
Sure,
but that's neither here nor there. But I've picked up my next video game. I've picked up that will take me way too long to beat is called Control. So I'm gonna. This is the.
I'm choosing escapism. My new video game is called Control. Tell us more, Mike.
Yeah. So this is the Wikipedia description because that was easier. So Control revolves around the Federal Bureau of Control, a secret U.S. government agency tasked with containing and studying phenomena that violate the laws of reality. As Jesse Faden, who's voiced by actress Courtney Hope, the Bureau's new director, the player explores the oldest house, the FBC's paranormal headquarters, and utilizes powerful abilities to defeat a deadly enemy known as the Hiss, which has invaded and corrupted reality. The player gains abilities by finding objects of power, mundane objects like a rotary phone or a floppy disk, imbued with energies from another dimension that have been at the center of the major paranormal events and since recovered by the FBC.
Sounds exhausting.
So the first 10 minutes of this game is walking around a creepy office building and finding documents that tell the story of what's going on, which I found incredibly soothing to just like read these documents, these memos from people and play through the game. But it also has a psychoanalytic theory of society and reality, kind of Jungian, underlying the whole premise of the show, of the game.
See, we're complicit in conspiracy theories ourselves too.
Yeah. So I'm an hour into it. I'm excited.
You know what Hiss makes me think of?
What?
The snake in the Disney Robin Hood.
That was my favorite movie as a child. I wanted to be Robin Hood so bad. I wanted to be as cool as Robin Hood was in that movie.
The Fox version.
The Fox version, yes.
Yeah.
Not
Not the
Who was it? It was What's his face?
Come on,
Kevin
Kevin Costner. I was thinking about Bryan Adams and the song that he was singing. I couldn't get my head to go back to the actors. That's all it. I mean, that's my associative.
I've never seen the Kevin Costner. Anyways, all right.
No, it's true. I won't go on.
It's just
everything I do. Yeah, I'll keep going. Anyway, we do it for you, cult favorite listeners. Everything we do. We'll sing it to you beneath a waterfall or whatever.
Thanks for listening to Cult Favorite. You can subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and a review. Follow us on the socials at Cult Favorite Pod. And if you have, leave us feedback. DM us, leave a comment. Tell
me what songs you want me to sing.
Yeah. Special thanks to the Department of Religious Studies. We can put polls up. We can put that up next time.
Sure.
At the University of Alabama for production assistance. And big thanks to the master's program, the Religion and Culture master's program. So we got new microphones. Thank you for that, everybody. And we will be back in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
All
Here
right.
we go.
Hang in there.
I'm ready.